Question. Can you be self-aware to a fault? Can you start to look for selves that aren't there, or else make one up, or make a self's severity greater than what it really is? Or you become too self-focused to a fault? Well, that's a very good question. And it's very important to consider this, because, as I said before, any kind of teaching you get, the ego can do its trick on it and try to use it to actually sabotage or slow down your growth. So the teaching that we're talking about here is that I've said that in order to descend to earth, we had to take on the conscious you, which is neutral awareness, had to take on these four lower bodies, the identity body, the mental body, the emotional, and the physical. And in order to integrate with these four lower bodies, we had to create these selves in the subconscious mind that make it seem believable to us that we are a physical body. But then I've also said that many of us have gone into the duality consciousness, the illusion that we are separate beings, and therefore we have created these subconsciouses based on duality. And so what I'm saying is that the entire purpose of us incarnating on earth is that we have certain experiences and we express ourselves here, both the I am presence and the conscious you. And it all revolves around free will, because we learn by making choices and seeing the consequences of it. So there's nothing wrong with us going into duality. It's part of what we're allowed to do as we're exploring free will. But in order to go into duality, we take on illusions. And that's what creates a separate self. And in order to get out of it again, we have to consciously come to see the illusion and voluntarily give up the self, let it die. It's simply the process. I mean, I know it's not described anywhere except in these teachings the Ascended Masters have given through me, but it is the process. We go into duality by creating these separate selves based on duality, and we have to get out of them. The only way out of it again is to see this consciously and let them go. So we can say, here you are. You have been burdened by your psychology your whole life. You have been looking for a way to overcome this. Now you find a spiritual teaching that talks about we have these subconscious selves, right? And so you become more aware of this. You suddenly, most people aren't looking at their psychology, right? They're not. My entire family, as I was growing up, nobody was looking at their psychology, thinking, "Oh, maybe I should change myself. Maybe I should overcome something, some habit." They weren't. Your psychology was your psychology. There was nothing you could do about it. But now you become aware and you become willing to look at yourself. And so the question is, can it become too much? And a person is saying, can you be self-aware to a fault? And I would say yes and no. And the reason why I say that is that I prefer to talk about self-awareness and self-consciousness. So the way I see it is, self-aware is when the conscious you steps outside of your normal state of consciousness. You are experiencing yourself as neutral awareness. And now you are looking at yourself, your life, your psychology, your habits, your actions, but you're just looking at it neutrally. That's self-awareness. You still can become aware that you have a certain habit pattern, subconscious self, but you're neutral about it. You're not condemning yourself for it. You're just observing. Self-consciousness is not that the conscious you steps outside of it. It's that the conscious you is inside a separate self. And that self is condemning you, judging you, criticizing you, putting you down. There's a concept used in psychology, it's called the inner critic. You're constantly criticizing yourself. That's not self-awareness, that's self-consciousness. So most of us, as we grew up, we were programmed, brainwashed to become self-conscious. Look at our faults, look at how we didn't do the right thing, how we didn't fit in to the crowd, how we didn't live up to the norm of our society. So self-consciousness comes from the ego, or rather certain subconscious selves that were projected upon us not only in this lifetime but in many past lifetimes. Conform to the standard. Play your role. Do the right thing. Be like everybody else. And if not, you should condemn yourself. So you better watch out. You know, it's this old song about Santa Claus, you know. You better watch out. You better not pout. Because Santa Claus is coming and he's making a list, seeing who's naughty and nice. This is promoting self-consciousness, right? So what can happen is that as you begin to dissolve these selves, you can become aware that you have this inner critic. I mean, a number of years ago, I became aware of this, that, gosh, I'm constantly judging myself. And when you resolve that self, there may be more than one, but when you resolve this, you go from being self-conscious to being self-aware. It's not that you suddenly say, oh, I'm ego-free, I don't need to look at my psychology. No, but now you're looking at your psychology with self-awareness, where you're just neutrally looking. Here I have a habit. Is it limiting me? Is it serving me? No. So let me get rid of it. Let me take a closer look and get rid of it without condemning yourself. So I would say that you are self-conscious to a fault. You can't really be self-aware to a fault if you make that distinction. Now the person then saying, can you start to look for selves that aren't there? Yeah. Most people, we have so many subconscious selves when we first start this process of consciously working on our psychology that it's probably not that they aren't there. But what can happen is that you can have this inner critic self that is, as the person says, you make a self-severity greater than what it really is. That certainly can happen. You can also say that there can be a subconscious self that is, well, let's put it this way. You can have you become aware of a certain subconscious self. You become aware of a certain habit. There can be another subconscious self that projects at you that the self is different than what it really is, in order to prevent you from seeing it. As I've said, you can see the effect of a self, which is your actions and your habits, but behind that is a belief you have, a certain illusion you believe in. And so there can be another subconscious self that's trying to prevent you from seeing the real illusion, camouflaging it so that you are looking in the wrong direction. That can happen. Now, I don't think it's something you really need to worry about if you're really willing to look at yourself. You will gradually work through that. And then the person says, can you become self-focused to a fault? And yes, I have seen in myself and other people that you can go through a phase where you become so eager to get rid of your psychology, to resolve your psychology, that you become very, very self-focused to the point you neglect other aspects of life or other people. And I think many spiritual people go through a phase where we find a spiritual teaching, a guru, an organization, and they put up a certain ideal and they have a certain method or meditation process or decreeing or whatever, and a certain practice, and then you become very eager at doing this. So you take classes, you go to retreats, and you do all these other things, you neglect other aspects of life. That is, in a sense, a self-focus. You can also, as a result of working on your psychology, you can become so focused on always looking for the next self. But that's, again, just a phase, because there comes a point where you have worked through this, that you can have a little more patience with yourself. I mean, I have, for the last probably 20 years, I'm constantly working on myself. But as I've said before, I don't do it from a deficit approach, that there's something wrong with me that I have to correct or compensate for. I realized at a certain point, I'm a spiritual person, I'm walking a path, I'm willing to look at myself. And if I'm constantly willing to look at myself, I will see one separate self at a time. And I don't need to feel that I'm always behind and that nothing is ever good enough. I'm just working on myself, and I'll be doing that for the rest of the time I'm in embodiment. But I don't need to beat myself up that I'm not perfect, that I'm not there yet. I don't need to feel that I'm behind. And so that's when you get a more balanced approach, where you're not so self-focused. So what I'm saying is, yes, you can definitely be self-focused, but it's also a phase. And of course, if you become aware of this, you can look for this self that makes you so self-focused, because it is the self that makes you think you are very, very important. And that it's important that you achieve whatever goal you have set, and if you're not there, you should feel bad about yourself. And that's just another self. Basically, you can say, you can come to a point where you realize that anything that gives you tension, anything that gives you stress, comes from a subconscious self. And then you can put these subconscious selves in a kind of a bind, because the only way they can influence you is to project thoughts and feelings into your mind. But if you experience that it gives you stress, then you can say, okay, I'm going to look for the self. So the only way the self can avoid being smoked out is by not influencing you at all. So what is the self going to do? And so you can come to a point where you can find a balance, where you're not so self-focused. And that's, of course, is a very good place to be. I would only wish that all people who are open to this teaching would come to that point. But that requires you to look at this self that makes you feel so obsessive-compulsive about, getting results in 5 minutes instead of allowing it to take its time. As I said, I've been on a spiritual path for 48 years. I have resolved a lot of things in my psychology, but I don't allow myself to think that I've resolved everything. And I'm okay with that. I'm totally okay with that. I'm just constantly looking for the next self without feeling like I'm imperfect for having selves left.